Roman soldiers were once taken down by poisoned honey. Ancient Egyptians buried it in tombs, and one kind doesn't even come from flowers. Honey gets much stranger than the plastic bear in your kitchen. Mad honey, the poison that tastes sweet. The story starts with a Roman general named Pompey chasing down an enemy king through the mountains of what's now northeast Turkey. His army belonged to Rome, one of the most feared fighting forces on earth. But the tribe he was chasing, the Heptacomedes, knew something Pompey didn't. The local bees were making honey that could drop a soldier in his boots. So they set a trap. They left pots of honey along the road Pompey's men were about to march down, then disappeared into the hills. Roman soldiers found the pots, and free honey after a long march looked like a gift. Here's why that honey was loaded. Bees in that region feed on rhododendron flowers, and rhododendron nectar carries a toxin called grayanotoxin. It locks onto sodium channels in your nerve cells and jams them open, which throws your whole nervous system into chaos. You don't even need much of it either. It doesn't take a lot of the wrong batch to make you seriously sick, and the Heptacomedes had left out gallons of it. Soldiers got dizzy, their lips and fingers went numb and tingly, and their heart rate dropped low enough to drop them to the ground, leaving them in no shape to fight back. The Greek historian Strabo wrote about what came next. The incapacitated Romans were attacked, and 3 maniples were reportedly cut down. It's one of the stranger recorded cases of an army being taken down by food instead of weapons, and it worked. Now here's the twist. You can still buy that same honey today, and people go looking for it on purpose. In the mountains of Nepal, honey hunting gets passed down father to son, and the job hasn't changed much in 1,000 years. Hunters climb the cliffs of the Himalayas hanging from handmade rope ladders woven out of bamboo and vine, smoking out wild hives that cling to rock faces hundreds of feet up, just to bring down a jar of what locals call mad honey. Miss a foothold up there, and the fall kills you a lot faster than the honey ever could. Down in Turkey, you can buy a version called deli, sold to tourists looking for a buzz. But grayanotoxin levels swing wildly, depending on the batch, the flowers, and the season, so there's no guarantee any jar is mild. A jar of the real thing, wild harvested and full strength, still sells for a lot more than the honey sitting in your cabinet. The same kind of grayanotoxin containing honey that once took down Roman soldiers, sitting in a shopping cart next to your protein powder. Egypt's honey that never dies. Archaeologists opening Egyptian tombs kept finding something strange sealed in with the pharaohs, jars of honey and honey residue, thousands of years old. The viral claim that archaeologists scooped out perfectly preserved edible honey isn't well documented. That part's stretched pretty thin. But the chemistry behind why honey resists spoiling in the first place, that part is completely real. Honey holds almost no available water, sitting around 16 to 19% moisture, and most bacteria need way more than that to grow. Think of it like curing bacon with salt. The sugar in honey grabs onto any bit of water in there so tightly that most microbes can't pull enough of it free to grow. Bees also add an enzyme called glucose oxidase while they're making it, and that enzyme produces hydrogen peroxide, the same stuff you dab on a cut, especially once the honey gets diluted with any moisture. Stack that on top of honey's acidity, sitting around a pH of 3 to 4, roughly in the range of black coffee, and you've built an environment where it's extremely hard for most microbes to get a foothold. Bees finish the job by capping each cell of the honeycomb in wax, sealing out most outside air and moisture, so it's hard for anything inside to spoil and hard for anything outside to get in. Egyptians treated honey like it was worth protecting. They used it in religious offerings, as medicine to dress wounds, and as a luxury good valuable enough to trade, tax, and record, alongside gold and grain in temple ledgers. Turns out that instinct wasn't wrong. Doctors today still use medical-grade honey on wound dressings in hospitals because its low moisture and acidity make it a rough environment for bacteria to grow in. That's not just raw honey pulled from a jar in your pantry either. Raw honey can carry spores, including Clostridium botulinum spores. So medical-grade honey gets sterilized and quality controlled specifically for wound care. Properly sealed honey can stay stable for a very long time, though heat, moisture, contamination, and how it's stored all affect how well it holds up. A quick mention before we keep going. If you enjoy these deep dives and want to support the channel, becoming a member is one of the best ways to help us keep making them. All right, Back to the honey. How bees actually make honey. Before you get into the different flavors, it helps to know how any of this happens in the first place. A bee lands on a flower and drinks up nectar with a straw-like tongue, storing it in a separate part of her body called a honey stomach, basically a holding tank. Apart from the stomach, she actually digests food with. Enzymes start breaking that nectar down the moment it's in there, turning complicated sugars into simpler ones. Back at the hive, she passes the nectar off to other worker bees, who pass it around some more, adding more enzymes each time it changes hands. Eventually, it lands in a cell in the honeycomb, still thin and watery, nowhere close to what you'd call honey yet. That's where the fanning comes in. Bees line up along the comb and beat their wings over the wet nectar for hours, pushing air across it until enough water evaporates out and it thickens up. Once it's concentrated enough, they cap the cell with a thin layer of wax and seal it shut until the hive needs it. Honeybees generally make honey through this process, start to finish. What changes everything is which flowers the bees were drinking from that day. The varietal map from mild to brutal. Start with the honey you've already had 100 times without thinking about it. Clover is one of North America's most common retail honey types, the one that shows up in the plastic bear, mild and pale gold. Bees make it from white and yellow clover, which grows in so many fields across the US and Canada that beekeepers can produce it by the truckload. The flavor stays soft and sweet without much personality, which is exactly why it works in tea or baking, disappearing into whatever you're making instead of fighting it. Clover honey is also the reason most people in North America think honey is supposed to taste mild, and everything darker on this list is about to taste like a completely different food. Acacia honey sits in a different lane completely. Pour it out, and it looks almost clear, like syrup that forgot to have color, and it stays liquid on your shelf for years without turning grainy. That comes down to fructose. Acacia honey carries an unusually high amount of it compared to other honeys, and fructose resists crystallizing the way glucose does. The flavor is light, with some people describing a faint vanilla note, so people use it to sweeten coffee or drinks without changing what they already taste like. Bartenders reach for it too, since it dissolves straight into a cold drink without clouding it up the way thicker honey does, and that clear color, plus the mild taste, is exactly why it disappears into a glass of iced tea without anyone noticing. Now, flip it completely. Buckwheat honey looks like it came from a different food group entirely. Dark, almost black, in the jar. Thick, like molasses pouring off a spoon. Buckwheat itself isn't wheat at all, despite the name. It's a flowering plant related to rhubarb, and the honeybees make from it carries a strong, almost malty flavor that clover honey never gets close to. Families across Eastern Europe have spooned it into tea for coughs and sore throats for generations, treating it more like medicine than dessert. It's often higher in antioxidant activity than lighter honeys, though that varies by sample. And studies have found honey may help ease nighttime cough symptoms in kids over a year old, which is probably why grandmothers swore by it long before anyone tested it in a lab. Tupelo honey has one of the shortest harvest windows of any honey on this list. It comes from white tupelo trees growing in the swamps of northwest Florida and southern Georgia, and those trees bloom for about 3 weeks out of the entire year. Miss the window, and you wait 12 months for another shot. Some beekeepers position hives close to the tupelo blooms, sometimes using water access or platforms, so the bees are right there the moment the bloom opens. What you get back is a honey with a buttery texture and a faint edge some describe as cinnamon-like. And thanks to its fructose content, it resists turning solid the same way acacia does. Real Tupelo honey costs a lot more than clover because that 3-week window doesn't leave much room for a bad harvest. Heather honey asks something different of you before you even taste it. Grown across the moors of Scotland, it comes out of the comb so thick and gel-like that pouring it doesn't really work. Heather honey is unusually thick and difficult to extract, so beekeepers may use pressing or other specialized methods just to pull it free, since it won't spin out the way thinner honey does. The payoff is a taste that's intense, floral, and bitter in a way that lingers, and Scottish beekeepers have been protecting that flavor for centuries like it's regional pride. Then there's chestnut honey, And this is where honey stops acting like a sweetener altogether. Chestnut honey is produced in Italy and other regions where chestnut trees bloom, and it comes out dark and bitter, tasting closer to coffee or dark chocolate depending who you ask, and definitely not anything you'd call sugary. Italian kitchens don't drizzle it on toast. They pair it with sharp cheeses like pecorino, treating it the way you'd treat a good balsamic, something to cut through fat and salt instead of adding sweetness. Every honey so far started with flower nectar. This one doesn't. Honeydew honey comes from bees collecting honeydew, a sugary excretion produced by aphids and other sap-feeding bugs on trees, not flowers at all. Bees pick that liquid straight off leaves and bark and turn it into honey the same way they would with nectar, except what comes out the other end is darker, maltier, and almost savory, closer to molasses than anything floral. It's common in parts of Europe, sometimes sold as forest honey, and it's proof that bees will turn almost any sugar they find into something you'd spread on toast. Every one of these honeys came out of the same insect doing the same basic job, just with wildly different starting ingredients. And the distance between a spoonful of clover and a spoonful of honeydew is bigger than the distance between grape juice and wine. The Manuka fraud. Manuka only comes from one bush in one country for a few weeks a year, and it's supposed to carry real health benefits on top of that. Put that much rarity and that much hype on one jar, and fraud shows up right behind it. Real Manuka comes from the nectar of the Manuka bush, a scrubby little plant that only grows wild in certain parts of New Zealand and flowers for a few weeks a year. Miss that window, and you're out of luck until next season. The Maori were using this plant long before anyone put a label on it, applying it to wounds and using it as medicine centuries before a scientist ever tested why it worked. That scientist was Peter Molin, a biochemist who spent years figuring out what made Manuka different from honey sitting in a plastic bear. He landed on a compound called methylglyoxal, MgO, for short, which builds up in Manuka honey at levels regular honey never reaches. Regular honey already has antibacterial effects from things like low available water, acidity, and hydrogen peroxide. Manuka adds another major mechanism, unusually high levels of MgO. Here's where it turns into a mess. Manuka got expensive, and anything expensive with a health claim attached becomes a target. Producers started blending cheap honey with a small amount of real Manuka, slapping the name on the label, and shipping it out to buyers who had no way of checking. Some jars sold as Manuka had barely any Manuka in them at all. The scandal got big enough that New Zealand's government stepped in and set rules for exactly which chemical markers honey has to hit before it's allowed to be exported and labeled as Manuka at all. So if you're buying Manuka, that little number on the jar tells you a lot more than the giant word Manuka printed across the front. UMF is a separate certification system, a trademark that grades honey after independent testing, sitting on top of the government's export rules rather than replacing them. MgO is simpler. It's just a straight measurement of how much methylglyoxal is actually sitting in that jar. A lower UMF number means lower measured levels of the compounds the grading system checks for. Once you get up to UMF 15 or 20, that's a jar with higher measured levels, and the price climbs right along with the number. Some brands print both UMF and MgO on the same jar because buyers who know what they're looking at want the two numbers to agree with each other. New Zealand's export rules don't just take a beekeeper's word for it, either. Exported Manuka has to pass a 5-part authenticity test using 4 chemical markers and 1 DNA marker. If it doesn't hit those numbers, it isn't allowed to carry the name outside the country. Grocery store honey doesn't need this kind of proof. Manuka does because Manuka is worth faking. And Manuka isn't even the only target. Honey is vulnerable to adulteration and origin fraud, particularly when premium labels create a financial incentive. Some products labeled honey on store shelves have been cut with rice syrup or corn syrup, or shipped through a different country to hide where it actually came from, stretching a small amount of real honey into a much bigger batch. Targeted testing crackdowns have caught batches like this in multiple countries, which is exactly why regulators keep circling back to check again. So next time you grab honey off a shelf, check the label twice before it goes in your cart. Hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more food fraud to get into.